And then I gotta get, see if we can get up Node.js here. Chat timer's going. Okay. All right. I think I'm ready. I think. Nobody knows the truth.
Is lighting good with it dim like that? Should turn on the overhead lights.
It doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and turn them on. Well, I mean, the main thing is people need to see the TV well.
Yeah. So you've got, what's that called again?
What?
OBS set up in different regions or whatever.
So,
So neat. Tinker, I guess, a little bit, but not to the extent that I should.
It's got a learning curve that's a brick wall, but once you kind of commit that you're using it. Hey! How are you doing, beautiful?
I assume you're talking to me.
That's correct. Alright, let's see here.
just have to remember to change the color temperature when the color temperature changes. Actually,
Really matter that much.
okay. Beep.
All right, I'll go get some pizza.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh no, that's right. Let's see. Good.
Okay.
Oh, and then I need to get the whatchamadiddle. Well, I guess I should do that over here. Alright. I'll share my screen. And my audio.
Well, how you guys doing?
So good.
So good.
Yeah.
Doing as one does.
Are we live already?
It's already recorded.
Okay. Do I normally say things I shouldn't?
Not while we're recording.
Yeah, I'm like,
No, you don't ever say things you should. But the
I
thought
say
police,
things snarky.
the
but-
thought police
Mhm.
like to police things they should.
Hmm. like didn't rip either, so I'm like, might as well just back off and say, I'm Jordan.
Jordan.
You're the one running, you work here, right?
Yeah, I work here.
Right. I was pretty sure, but.
Mostly do front end stuff, but trying to do a little more full stack things, opposite things.
Nice. What kind of front end do you do here?
Written in Vue, it's still Vue 2. I'm migrating things to Vue 3 as I go. We're kind of like still using Beautify, which hasn't released a version that supports Vue 3 fully yet, but we've got some betas that are pretty close, I guess.
What's cool you guys are using Vue. It's one of my biggest issues when trying to find jobs is they're almost all React. I'm like, no, I hate it.
Like,
Why?
Vivint was an Angular shop.
Mhm.
I joined, and then I was the one that convinced them to migrate to Vue.
Nice.
And then I went to work for another company for a while that was a React shop. And, yeah, it's just a total different experience. It's
Mhm.
just so many different flavors of state libraries. And you're always reinventing your code base like every
Yep.
release.
You know, it's my biggest issue at my last job is I'm a software engineer. I do back end and front end, and I do JavaScript, and so I can do React, but I don't follow the ecosystem. I don't listen to the podcasts. I don't and so then it's like you've got people who have just come out of a boot camp know more than me about React because.
Well, the latest flavor of React. Flavor, like using
React hooks versus
hooks versus
yeah.
classes, or Redux.
Oh, like what CSS and JS solution is the one you used this week?
That one's pretty cool, but there's another one that's it's also that whole atomic CSS concept, but it's pre-rendered or whatever. You're more pattern matching your code and it will spit out rather than Tailwind gives you a giant CSS generator to be the first one that has to whittle that down, but you don't use After Effects. So it's you're still writing your little selectors, but it's smart enough to expand those patterns out.
Uno CSS?
Yeah, Uno CSS, yeah.
Yeah, that one's cool. I followed, because the guy who made that started Wendy CSS.
I followed Wendy.
Yeah, and Wendy kind of had its Justin Childs thing before Kelvin did.
No, not after
And
2
then
p.m. or something.
But I didn't follow a whole lot.
I've set it up and tinkered with it a little bit, but I haven't really put it in properly.
Yeah. It's,
Okay.
It's nice, but it's kind of a pain to get like stuff to work.
Are we streaming on the YouTube channel?
Yeah. Random filling like. But yeah, it's cool, and it seems to be somewhat popular in the Dino ecosystem.
I have yet to try Dino. I don't know what the benefits of Dino are.
I'm
Prolific.
Dino's for ninnies.
Is it supposed to be faster? Is that its selling point, or?
That's what they switched the selling point to, because they weren't winning on their other selling point. So now they switched it over to it's the fastest, despite the fact that Bun is the fastest.
They're like, it runs JavaScript.
Yeah, that's the new selling point.
That's the selling point. It runs JavaScript.
The new press release thing that they came out with on their blog is it runs JavaScript the fastest.
Who came out with that, Bun or Dino?
Dino.
That was interesting.
Dino's regressing from being a TypeScript platform to just being
Wasn't that
better than Node.
It was written by the guy that wrote Node, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yep. Okay.
And a package system ecosystem, a package ecosystem reset
Mike,
is a
I'm
good
pretty sure you were
idea,
giving the other
but there just
presentation.
wasn't enough people migrating over.
Well, Corona times.
Your name?
Jordan.
Jordan. And what was
Travis.
Travis.
Will.
And
Caleb,
Yep.
I know because you're presenting.
Yep.
Okay, why? What's going on here? Are we even live?
You feeling ready?
I think so. I presented it to my team at a meeting we had this week,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like 15 to 20 minutes, or no, like 25 minutes. I was rushing through it. I feel like it's still trying out a little bit of this, but I don't think that's the right information. It's like looking into the topic I discovered like a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm not
So
even
I
sure.
saw Dead Mouse last weekend.
To go
Yeah.
down.
Like, I'm not
Everybody
even
was
sure
doing
JS on
drugs.
the Edge is a good title for
There's
it.
just
'Cause I like writing
nothing else. That's all it was.
stuff. But it was really cool.
Nice.
Look at it.
I'm excited.
I felt like the odd man out. I felt like I was the only sober person there.
No.
What's your name?
Zeke.
I don't know if you want my pizza on the, I don't know. Z?
Yeah.
What is going on, Jordan?
Jordan? No joke.
What's your name?
Jake,
Jake, that's right. I'm making copy.
Jordan, and Caleb.
You guys,
Hey,
He's like, I'm good.
the prodigal presenter returns.
What's up, Ben?
I'm ready to present,
No, you're not presenting today. You returned the wrong time.
but I'm still ready to present anyway.
Okay, good. I like that.
We got pizza.
Okay, you go get some pizza.
Is it bad that I'm not ready to present next week yet, or is it okay?
Are you presenting next week?
At the Russ one? I think I am.
Okay. Okay, something's up here.
I don't know the rest of them.
I'm not a Russ.
No,
expert.
no, somebody fix it.
Hello, world.
Somebody fix it. The TV's gonna turn off.
I was trying
I
to.
don't know. Is this
do
thing?
something, but I wanted to do Rust that would just print out whatever screen you get it and then compile it to Webassembly.
This computer's not powerful enough to handle.
Oh, there we go.
You couldn't get it to
Well,
install.
I couldn't get it to compile, Ercanbrack, but it was Latin.
Oh,
I think, yes.
something that had other dependencies or something, and you just couldn't get the right.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, something, either like some SSO library that, what, this is Fedora 36, or whatever that, it's not like, I don't need this.
Who's presenting this? Caleb? You're presenting this?
I'm presenting this, then he's presenting.
Oh.
Is the one screen fine? I guess that remote must be able to switch over to the other monitor.
Oh, I might have to force restart my computer.
That might be easier. Might also not. I always have this with Docker.
It's not too bad. I tried the dev figures. The all-in-one. Sometimes it works really nice. Like,
Okay.
Under Node projects, it's a thing to get all the right dependencies, but you just run it in that Docker container. Or in whatever version of dev you use. That percent.
So I've been learning about the POSIX shell.
POSIX shell.
Yeah.
As opposed to.
Bash. Yeah.
So what's the command? Is it?
SH.
Oh, just SH? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's basically what everything else is based on. Right?
No, actually, it's after Bash was created, then they kind of went backwards and said, Bash is too big and complicated. Can we just take some of the mistakes from the last 20 years and include most of them, but not all of them? And then it was ratified by a standards body and called POSIX. So a POSIX shell is a Bash shell that doesn't do as much and isn't as good, but also isn't as worse.
Have you ever used C shell? I don't even know why they call it C shell. It looks nothing like C.
No.
Like a fish, which I know.
Oh, he
says
loves
not-
fish.
I think it
That's-
says it's not pockets. Or like explicitly said something.
I don't have CSH and stuff.
Fish is the shell that.
Yeah, I use Bash because I've been forced to use Bash.
No, you use Bash for scripting unless you know that you're supposed to use POSIX for scripting. You don't use Bash as your shell that you interactively log into. That's not appropriate.
I
No,
guess
no.
I guess for me it's just always available everywhere, you know.
Like
It's always
fish, for
installed.
example?
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh,
The FI tab.
you didn't install it.
Yeah, but if I do Bash, it's there. That's how lazy I am. I'm not going to install one thing.
Well, you only have to install it once. All right, let me
No,
get.
my friend's been telling me to switch to Fish. It's better.
Am I your friend?
Huh?
Am I that friend?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. You're one of two friends that have told me to switch to Fish.
And you don't script in it, and you don't copy and paste Bash commands into it. It's just for what it's for. Okay. Do we have this sharing yet?
What do you use for your slide?
Everybody asks that. So it's actually, there you go. You can go to slides, then you can get the link to how to build the slides.
Oh, slides built from these slides. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
That works.
Well, we're all here early today. That must mean there's a lot of people coming. We'll probably have to make more room. That's good.
It's a MIDI.
A MIDI controller?
Yeah.
Oh, is it like a theremin?
Kind of, you can treat it like a theremin.
No
Just
way.
affects the tilts.
That's sick.
Pitches and there's also you can detect like vibrato or.
Wait, hang on, what is this? I'm
It's
not
a-
hearing you,
it's
now
like a-
I'm interested.
It's a
theremin.
MIDI controller.
Mhm.
So like it detects like the pitch and the roll or whatever.
Mhm.
And then like I've been working on like a 3D like CSS navigation thing.
Nice. That's cool.
That's next level, man.
It's very cool. So we can turn myself for
Are you to make electronic music?
got a bunch of equipment that I haven't gotten very good at making actual music. But it's the MIDI, the LEDs and stuff that I like. It's like little scripts that like light up little patterns.
That's cool.
And Chrome has like a WebLead API, so you can talk to your device in the browser.
So you can control it from the browser? That's crazy.
AJ,
What's up?
Wi-Fi password?
I don't know.
I'm asking for Caleb, not me. Gosh.
I don't know. I don't know.
Oh wow.
Travis, right?
So
Wi-Fi?
you can actually play.
Wi-Fi password?
Yeah.
You just have to same as that. Yes, I don't know the Wi-Fi password. We just use our Okta credentials, and I'm not giving you mine.
Hello?
Hello. There's a.
You got some pizza?
Oh, I got some.
Chords
No worries.
upstairs, they're called, there's two of them. There's a mini log and a chord pro log, and they open source their engine. Yeah. I mean, it's like $1,200, but.
I've got like innovation year, so like the pad and
Live streaming on Twitch.
So is it just mostly USB controllers?
But my main
Looks like the Vivint
doesn't require a password.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, those are really popular, aren't they? Like they have like sampling.
I haven't seen one without a
So
password.
it's been pretty cool to like, not that I'm not very good at it, but like I've piped my microphone from my phone into that output to my audio interface so that like I could use that as my microphone input.
Oh wow.
So that's
So you can do like vocoder stuff?
Yeah, I could do like different like
That's hilarious.
voice pitch and stuff. It's
That's awesome. That is cool. Sorry, AJ. That's all you
What? No, we got another
got.
few minutes. I'll wait for people to eat their pizza and a few more people to get here. Oh. We're good.
Yeah, most of my equipment is just I have a core Chronos that I control all my gear with.
Well,
It's over.
let's just do reintroductions real quick. I don't know your name. I don't know if I've ever seen you here before.
No, this is my first time.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Furkan, currently 16 years old. I'm working as a full stack engineer intern. And here to learn new things, make connections. So that's it about me.
You're in the right place. And what did you say your name was?
Furkan.
Furkan?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, Furkan. And then when you grab a seat, we'll have you go next.
So, I'm Neil Myers. I am a full-time React Native mobile developer at ADT. I just bought a house down the road here, so we can come to these meetups more in the future.
That's a smart move.
Yeah,
That was a smart move.
That's the only reason you want that.
that's the only reason, yeah.
Ride the price increase to the meetups.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm looking to write like a syllabus for web development and stuff for some classes that I will have the opportunity to teach soon. So I just came here to get some pro tips from the master.
Cool. I'd love to chat with you more about that because I am.
I've got my eye on you, ADT, Vivint.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm very interested in creating course material, but I'm also a very nonlinear thinker,
Yeah.
which doesn't help.
Yeah. I think that's just the curse of learning how to code, is you're thinking like 3 or 4 steps ahead the entire time, and you're like, oh, I just need to put these things in the right places.
It's harder to tell the story because it's like, these are the things that must be done first, and these are the things that are the most important. But then when people, to teach the story, you don't do the things that need to get done first because
Yep.
you have to first show the problem that leads to that thing needing to be done. You have to so I was trying to keep that in mind while I did these, but we'll see how it turns out.
Well, you said you're gonna be teaching a class.
Possibly. I'm talking with like the CTE director of Utah.
Okay.
So I used to teach like the CTE teachers that teach at like high schools and stuff. I used to teach those people.
Okay.
So I want to get back into that kind of thing.
Cool.
Maybe some high schoolers or something.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I'll make sure we actually grab your face here, or you run away.
Mine's scooting down. For me? You want me to?
And do you want to introduce yourself too?
No.
All right, that's a no.
Which is a shame because she's the most impressive one of us all in that.
Hello, everyone. I've seen most of you guys do before. I'm Jake. Nice to meet you. Excited to be here.
You have a very deep voice,
I do, yes.
so say your name one more time.
My name is Jake.
Jake. It didn't sound like Jake when you said it last. It did when you said it out there. Anyway, all right.
Hi everyone, my name is John.
I don't remember you, John.
You don't?
I do remember.
Oh, I was gonna say I come every month.
That's it. That's just John. Okay, cool.
Someone here.
Caleb's going to be presenting later tonight.
Just you.
It's no pressure.
I know.
Presenting.
We're going to learn about JavaScript on the edge from, wait, where, oh, okay, never mind. But Caleb's going to do that. Anyway, Jordan.
Hello, I'm Jordan, software engineer, builder of things, all that good stuff.
All right.
I'm Z. I've been a middle school teacher for many years, but I'm looking to transition to web development.
My name's Travis. I work here at Vivint. I've been doing web development since the late 90s. Yeah. Focus mostly on front-end stuff.
My name's Will. I do Node, PHP, C++, and other stuff, DevOps, and yeah.
I guess I can't introduce myself. I just put on the spot. It was really scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Okay, we'll flip it over to you. You can just speak to the people. You don't have to worry about the camera. I just do it because there's a few
It
people
was just
joining
really
online.
scary.
I do that. I do scary.
Okay. My name is Hai Han. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Utah for computer science. I do web development most of the time.
All
You
right.
do, what was that?
Web development
Web
for
development.
my PhD.
Cool. All right. And then I think that brings us back around to me. I'm AJ. I run the meetup. And I'll give myself a proper introduction with my slides once I finish the pizza. Oh, Christian. But yeah, let's go back over to Christian.
Hi everybody, I'm Christian. I'm also a web developer. I'm also getting into machine learning. And my company is hiring, so message me if you're interested.
What language?
Mostly, we have a variety of different things like JavaScript, Java, SQL, C#. Different positions require different languages. It's a pretty big company. So if you don't know all of those, it's okay. I mean, I think we can find a spot for you. Except for you, Will.
Except for
You're just
yeah,
trouble.
I'm sorry.
You're trouble.
Why'd I ask?
What's the company?
It's called Tyler Tech. We build websites for the federal government and state governments.
Nice.
That is trouble.
No, we are almost as much trouble as Will, but
Yeah.
Maybe you do want.
we're aspiring.
You're aspiring troublemakers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got 2 more bites of pizza, and then I'll dig into this.
That's enough time for us to reintroduce ourselves a second time.
Oh well, it's 38 seconds. We're starting on time for once. This is great. All right, I'm gonna get rid of this, my bomb. Well, hello everybody, and welcome back. It's good to see so many of you here. This fills my heart with joy. I hope that I don't scare you away like the last group of people that used to come to these things. I'm AJ O'Neill. I am presenting tonight on Express.js Pro Tips. As always, this is a very discussion-oriented format. We're all around the round table here, or the rectangle table as it were. So don't feel afraid at any time to interrupt. You can ask the stupid question here where no one cares about you, or you can ask the stupid question at work. So pick your poison. Ask it here. These are useful links. So these slides are at beyondcodebootcamp.github.io. If you go there, then you will be able to click on the presentations link and then click on the Express.js Pro Tips link. The video link will go here shortly after this. And everybody always asks, what do you use for your slides? So here is the slides builder that I use right there. And there's probably some other useful links in here at some point. We'll see. So @_beyondcode if you want my non-garbage tweets, my tech-only tweets, and youtube.com/BlvdJ6 for my garbage live streams. Dangerous wrong thinker, equal opportunity offender, as all of you that are still here know, and technophobic. I think that technology is going to cause the world to end. That's what that means. Anyway, also, we got too many things. Let's just skip ahead here. So, Express.js pro tips. So I put this also known as mastering the basics, because I think that most of the pro tips are just knowing the simple things that you might not otherwise know, or that's not obvious from the documentation, etc. So if at any point in time you find this useful, consider like, sub, follow if you want to. And we'll just go ahead with, I think that these are actually in the right order. So basically I got my top 12 tips here with some bonus material. These are the things we're going to go over. Some of them take much more time to go into than others, but we'll see how this goes. So my 0th tip that isn't even on here is just use strict. A lot of people don't know this, but use strict is a thing that converts mistakes into errors. I'm not going to go into all of what it does. If you have a proper linter config, it could be argued that since you're getting all the errors, warnings from your linter, that maybe you don't need to put it in, whatever. But every single JavaScript file that you have should begin with use strict. That's just a general JavaScript tip, so that it catches, it turns, like it says, it converts mistakes into errors. Anyway, and you can automate that with the bstrict module. So that wasn't really a tip about Express. That's just general. Also, prettier JS hint, TSC. Having good tooling. That's my 0th tip: is use strict mode, use good tooling. So the first tip is to use nodes HTTP, and it doesn't matter until it matters. So this is what you don't do. What you don't do is call app.listen on Express. Now I'm taking the approach that, first of all, everybody here has used Express. If that's not the case, I'm sorry. You can ask questions at any time. But this example is a bad example. In fact, this whole example is a bad example. We're going to break that down a little bit. But the reason you don't want to do that is because if you use that Express wrapper listener, it's going to break WebSockets. Maybe you're not using WebSockets out of the gate, so that's fine. It's also just a useless abstraction, and it confuses the reader because you think that what you're getting back is a server instance, but what you're actually getting back is a function that wraps a server instance and then throws the server instance away. And that's kind of confusing. So what you do instead is you just require HTTP from Node. And then you create an HTTP server the normal way, and then you listen on the HTTP server the normal way. And people say, but it's 3 lines long, with 2 lines longer. Oh no! It's okay. You could put it all into 1 line if you wanted it to look messy. So
doesn't the listen call block? So anything after?
Nope.
No?
Does not block.
Okay. That's good.
Nope. There's Node does not block except for a while loop. That's the only thing it block as far as I'm aware. But thank you for asking. It will throw an error. It will throw an error in some circumstances. If you can call .listen and it can throw an immediate error, but it's not blocking. I don't remember what those circumstances are. It's probably a bug. It probably doesn't do that anymore. Yeah, but I think that actually will now go through the error handler like it's supposed to. So tip number 2 is to use npm run start. And this is really simple. All you need to do is just name your file server.js that has your server in it. That's the only thing you need to do. And then you can use npm run start. And the reason to do this is really nothing other than that it's a common convention. You're probably familiar with doing this with other projects. So it's just nice to just have some consistency, and I don't think there's any other real benefit to it than that. But one thing that you do need to know, this is just a little bonus pro tip here, is there's a bug with the way that Node resolves paths that usually won't affect you, and will almost never affect you in a containerized environment, and for some reason is just kind of a won't fix. But there's this workaround. You can set scripts prepend node path, and what this means is that whenever you run npm and then npm runs something, and that node process might run another process, it always makes sure that the same version of node and the same node modules and the same everything about the environment uses the same paths. Rather than potentially switching paths as different processes open. Again, you're not likely to encounter this bug, but if you just set this and have it in your npm RC, then you won't ever have the bug and you won't ever spend 3 hours trying to track down why is this thing running a different version than the one that I obviously installed. So just kind of a weird thing, but good to know about.
Problem with Node or with npm?
It is that's a good question.
Well, I was thinking like this PNPM symlinks everything. I was wondering if like you would run into that way.
I think that it probably is a problem with npm because it's when npm runs a script. npm may run a script that's a different version than the version of Node that originally called it. So when you have several scripts where one script depends on another in your npm config, I think that's where this is a major offender. I've run into the problem. It's taken me hours to debug it, so it's just and you never need the old behavior. I don't know why they keep it, but for whatever reason they won't. And then another thing that you need to know about using npm run start is that this is just a common POSIX convention, meaning that across all Unixy environments and all Unixy commands, you use a double dash to tell the command that you first ran to stop looking for flags. So for example, if you did npm run start and you gave it an option that it understood, let's say -- help, if your program has a -- help, instead of running your program's help, since npm run start has a -- help, it would run the npm run start -- help. So you put a double dash and then your program's flags and options, so that npm run start doesn't swallow any options that look similar to its own. So that's just another little pro tip there. All right, so now we're on to number 3. This is that once we get our program doing anything useful at all, we have some sort of configuration. In fact, we already have configuration. And we don't want to commit our configuration or our secrets into code. So very early on, and hopefully everybody here at the table knows about this. If not, now is the time to learn. There's this thing called the 12-factor app, and it sets forth a bunch of guidelines. We don't do it because of the guidelines. We do it because the guidelines happen to be really, really smart and good things to do. But so I just want to quote from this a couple of things. Everything that is likely to vary between deploys, and I'll say more importantly for us in this room, vary between developers. Somebody else is going to run the code that you're working on. So I'd say don't worry about deploys so much. That's not something that you necessarily need to deal with. But just think other people need to run your code too. So anything that's likely to vary between development environments, you should have a strict separation of config from code. And a good litmus test for this is that if you were to make this thing open source, other people should A, be able to run it, and B, shouldn't charge you money. When we talk about secrets, secrets are basically things that charge you money. Amazon credentials, DigitalOcean credentials, et cetera, et cetera. Mailing credentials, things that either charge you money or destroy your reputation. Your login tokens for Twitter when you're creating your little demo Discord apps and Twitter apps and all that stuff, and then you commit your personal login token, and then all of a sudden all your friends are getting spam from you that's actually authenticated from you because you published your token publicly. So the number one reason that we tell you you're supposed to be concerned is because of the security vulnerability, and this is true even in private repos. You don't say, oh, well, this repo is private, it doesn't matter, I'll just config all. No, don't do that, because at some point that code transitions. You have to share it with a partner, you end up making part of it open source, whatever. So not even in private repos. But I think the more important piece, the overarching piece, is that you want your code to be easy to share with other people and other people in your team to work on. So if you don't use .envs, then your code's less secure and it's more difficult to share at scale. So let's actually take a practical application of this. Maybe I should have started with this. But this 3000, this is a constant. This should not go in our code. This is a config. Someone else may also be running something on port 3000 because every example on the web uses port 3000, whether it's Ruby or Python, excuse me, or whatever it happens to be. Everybody uses port 3000 it's just for whatever reason. So we need that to be config. And so in Node, it's called process.env. In other environments, in Python, I think it's os.env or something like that. So, but every programming language has this. There's this thing called the environment. And the environment, basically, there's a process that runs your code. And that process has a bunch of variables. And those are called the environment variables. So you can get access to an environment variable. You can, these generally, there are some that are special, but generally in your app, you're not going to use the special ones. You're going to use the de facto standard ones that are for just what people use. So generally, it's called port. The environment variables are always uppercase by convention. Don't do them lowercase. You'll make someone cry. Definitely me. And so you just assign that to a variable, and then you put that in there, and you're all good. But of course, now we have this problem of how the heck do we get this thing into the environment? And that's where the .env comes into place. How do I modify the environment? So you create this file. It's literally called .env. It has no name. It's just an extension. It's just .env. And then you put these key value pairs in there, and on the left, it's all caps variable names. And on the right, it's a string. It's always a string. You can't do numbers. You can't do anything else. It's got to be a string. That's your only option. And there's an equal sign. So you create an env file, and you have a bunch of these, and you put your secrets in there too. Secret API key. There's my API token, whatever. And then the first thing that you need to do, aside from the other first thing that you need to do, is you need to update your .getignore so that you don't accidentally commit your .env. Because maybe you update your code, you got clean code, you commit clean code, and then you commit your .env, and then manager calls you up and says, hey, do you have any idea why we got a $20,000 bill last night for GPU services on Amazon under your developer account? And then you say, no, I have no idea. And then your manager says, because you committed your .env file, you tard. And then he lovingly forgives you. A call with Amazon resolves it, and everything's okay. But if it's your social media profile, well, things with girlfriend might not go so well. Anyways, so yeah, you got your .getignore so you don't commit that. And then, yeah, we already, I don't know why I said that twice, but that's okay. Oh, and then a bonus thing. There's also this just super common thing here is to have a node env. It's either production or development. And one nifty thing you can do is you can, the other example this came from wasn't, slides are out of order, whatever. Anyway, we'll talk about this in just a second, but you can basically, the Express server instance, you can call .set on it and set JSON spaces to 2 or 4, whatever you fancy, not 3. That's a cardinal sin. 5 is right out. But then you can pretty print all of your JSON responses if you want to. So that's another neat thing that the envs are good for. Okay.
Wait, is that node env variable is just built into the process? You don't have to set it yourself?
Process.env, no, node env, you set it yourself.
Oh, okay.
You set it yourself, but generally you're setting it either to production or development.
Cool.
And so you could just say, well, if it's not production, then just pretty print all the things. Anyway, but the thing that I want to warn you about with this process.env, because you get, it's global config. I can use it in 100 files. I don't have to organize my code anymore. Anytime I need a setting, I just process.env it, right? And the answer to that is you absolutely can, if you like stabbing yourself deeply in the chest. So try to limit your access of process.env to 1 or 2 files, and if you find that it's starting to spread, consider adding a .create or a .init or something like that to your module where you pass in the env stuff rather than just sprinkling process.env all throughout your code because of reasons which I won't go deeply into right now. So then, okay, so you got this .env file, but that's actually just a convention that somebody made up. It's not a real thing. I mean, it's not part of the POSIX standard at least. So you've got 2 options. You've got .env or .env. We'll go into those. Well, and you got a third, which is the vault. We'll talk about that in a second. But basically, there's this command called .env that you can use to run in front of other commands. and that will load the .env file. So this is how you would install that if you want to, webinstall.dev/.env. It works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And then, so whatever you were going to do, you just run .env in front of it. Because some commands like .env and npm run start are stackable. So you can just take this command and then put another command in front of it, and it just uses the double dashes to kind of know, is this stuff meant for me or meant for something else? And so .env will just take whatever it was given, and then it will run it. And then that thing gets run, and then it takes whatever it was given, and it runs that. And so on and so forth. So you can stack, some commands like this, you can just stack in front of each other, and .env is one of them. And the nice thing about the .env command is that it follows the spec. It's not POSIX, but there is a spec for .env. It allows you to have an export prefix, which doesn't matter until it matters, but when it matters, you'll know, and then you'll see that there's issues that have been reopened for the past 7 years on the other thing, and the author continually closes them and disregards the fact that it's part of the spec, so, and it's a small change, but he's got whatever. And it allows multi-line strings. So this is why we like that one. So you could do stuff like this. You can have export port equals 3000, export key equals, and then have a nice multi-line string there, and you're all hunky-dory and happy. Or option B is that you install the npm module .env that the author refuses to follow the spec, even though people have done the PRs for it. I don't understand. He doesn't seem to present an argument other than, I don't like it. I think because he wants his to be any files, because I think he comes from Windows. I think that's what he said. He wants his to be any files. It's like, well, it's not an any file. It's an env file. But whatever. I ranted too long. So then once you install that, then you need to use it. So basically under your use strict, you just put required .env.config path .env. And you can actually load more than one .env file. I do this. I have a .env and a .env.secrets because I stream. And so I will put all the stuff that is okay for the config stuff that's okay for me to show on the stream. I'll put in the .env and the .env.secrets. I'll edit on a different screen. But so you can have more than one of these. And you could shortcut this, and you could just omit this. But I always favor clarity over brevity, especially when you're talking about just one line here and there. If you just look at this, you know exactly what it's doing. It's reading in this file. So someone who's less familiar with this module and doesn't understand why do you have this strange, require .env here, what does this do? That gives it gives the reader a clue. So, but the downside to this is then you have to have it in your code. You only have to have it in one place. But it's kind of a tomato potato. You could take either approach. One thing to note is that process.env will not be overwritten. So you can load as many .env files as you want, but once an env, an environment variable, is set, it will not be replaced. So winner first wins is the precedence order. So if process.env.port was defined before you even ran the .env, then it will prefer whatever was already in the environment. So that brings us to the last option, which is cloud services have their own thing. So GitHub calls it secrets. Yes, Jordan.
What about if it's in the same file? If you have port up top and then port.
Winner wins. First one wins.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep. It's parse order. So cloud services have their own thing. What I mean by this is the .env file is a substitute for the environment. So back in the olden days, there's actually, it's funny, I didn't show you the POSIX way to do this. POSIX, the Unixy way, is you actually just put dot, and then you put a file name, and what that will do is it will source, it's called sourcing, the config. And this is the way that we used to do it back in the 1980s and the 1990s, is we just type dot and then the name of our config file, and that would tell the shell to read in the environment variables and do what .env does. The problem with this is that it sets them for the lifetime of your shell. So the whole time you have your terminal open, those environment variables are set. Whereas when you run .env, it only loads them for the lifetime of the process. So when you hit Control-C or otherwise quit the program, all of those environment variables that were running for that program, they don't matter because they were only running for that instance of the program. So that's why this approach is a little bit better. But the cloud instances, they do their own thing. You're going to have some sort of secrets vault that's going to have some key value pairs. And you click save and the page refreshes. And you have to painstakingly enter them in one by one rather than just being able to copy and paste a file, but whatever. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. They basically have the functionality of .env is just built into Docker. It's built into shells. It's built into operating systems that run on servers and cloud devices, servers, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So don't use express. Note the parentheses, because obviously if we're talking about express tips, it would be really trolly of me to say don't use express, although I did do that at a PHP presentation one time, and I proceeded to present on why you shouldn't use PHP. But that's not what I'm doing tonight. Not trolling you. Notice the parentheses. What I'm saying is you don't want to use this thing. This is wrong. This is actually wrong. It kind of goes against what they talk about in the documentation. Because this thing is not composable, meaning it's not reusable. You can't create an express instance and then make it a component that can be used in another server. And it has unintended side effects, which we'll touch on briefly and almost completely. So we'll call this a big app. So when you do this, you could call it the server or the big app. But you will find that eventually you want to enable some things like, for example, the JSON spaces or this trust proxy, or there's a few other options that you want to set the options. And what you're setting the options for are actually typically things that are at the whole application layer or to deal with the HTTP layer or the networking layer. And if you create multiple of these, each one of them has their own internal state. And so if you try to compose them together, then you end up with them behaving in odd ways, because some of your routes will allow your reverse proxy server to connect to them, but other ones won't. What's going on? Or why is my JSON pretty printing in development on these routes but not on these routes? And the reason is because you followed the stupid example that they give, and you didn't read the documentation in detail and glean all of the information that should have just been in the simple example, but whatever. And I asked the guy, I said, so how about we just change the documentation because this is bad documentation and it leads to bugs? And he says, yeah, I understand. If it's causing problems, maybe we should just remove it and people should read the documentation. So we'll see how that conversation progresses. But he agrees. It's a bad example on the homepage or on the README. So this is what we want to do instead. So very, very similar, hardly any difference. What you want to use is express.router. Express.router does all the expressy stuff that you generally want to do, which is dealing with routes, but it doesn't modify any of the global state or the application state, and it doesn't create any new state or modify any state. And so what you can do is basically you create your Express server. You need that because it has all of the machinery for how to handle the routes all the way up at the root level. But then you just do server.use app, and that's it. That's all you need to do, and you're done. So it will work properly, and then everything that you want to do with, if you want to compose routes, if you want to store routes in different files, you use express.router for that, and then everything will work as expected, and you won't run into any weird bugs. So very, very simple. But again, we've already made, just so far, we've already made the basic boilerplate 4 or 5 lines longer, and we got to have that cuteness. So I already explained that, so we know. Okay. Yeah, so when I'm talking about composition, this is what I'm talking about. So you've got your server.use app. And you set things on the server. Server.set JSON spaces, server.set trust proxy, server.set renderer, this, that, or the other. But then your apps, your sub-apps, you just use the router, and then you can say, well, I want this sub-app to belong to this root here, but if it just calls next all the way down, then I'll use this sub-app. And if that calls next all the way down, then it'll go to this sub-app. And one thing that's kind of interesting to note is that if you just take, this is the poor man's sub-app, is you could just take some middleware functions and just put them in array brackets. And that's kind of similar to creating a router. Just kind of a little bonus there. you rarely need to know it, but you need to store it in memory because you'll come across an occasion and you'll end up on the Stack Overflow post where I think I went and added an answer. But you got people coming up with crazy solutions to be able to do what's supported out of the box. Is basically, what if I don't want to create an express router, I just want to be able to take a couple of handler functions and put them back to back. That's how you do it. Okay, so next we're up on using error handlers because now, probably should show what our app looks like up to this point, but we're gonna use some error handlers instead. So the basic rule of thumb, or the little pretty cute saying is, let errors bubble until they burst, correct or classify, but do not catch. So here is an example of almost every Express route you'll see written by novice Express developers, which is pretty much all of them. Is that you'll have this big try-catch block, and hopefully not multiple try-catch blocks. But the reason for this is reasons. Anyway, so, but let's just, I'll get back to that later. So I think the thing I want to focus on here is that if you have some sort of exception, don't catch it in the handler. That's the main thing we need to worry about. This right here, the res.json message had a bad day. This is wrong. This is wrong because Express has error handling built in, and we shouldn't be rewriting error handling in every single function that we write. For a couple of reasons. One, when you actually start to grow your application and you need to debug and you need to deal with customer support and stuff like that, if you have one place that your error handling goes through, then you can add more debugging in that one place. So for example, and I know other people do this as well, create a random ID, stick it on the error. We get the path that the error came from, the URL route, because the error itself may not include the URL route in it because it came from some deep database code or whatever. But you want to know what route caused this duplicate entry error, because if all you get at the end is duplicate entry error and you have no idea where it came from in your application, that's not really fun. So if you're doing this, then you end up with all these disparate error messages, and some of them are the same, and some of them are different, some of them have good information, some of them don't. So we want to collect all the errors in the same place so that we can have a systematized way of dealing with errors. So yeah, messy error handling, errors all over the place. Error handling is one of the things that's best centralized. And I think this is well regarded in the software engineering community, that errors is one of the things. Logging, errors, and routing are things that are best done centrally and not scoped to components or packages, however you want to look at it. So this would be a better way to do this. We just simply, in our .get, we just simply don't handle the error. Because if we had an exception and we don't handle it, it will get caught by the error handler. And then we can have an error handler. Notice the error handler is a .use typically, and the error handler must have all 4 of these passed in: error, request, response, next. All 4 must be there. That's what makes it an error handler, is a little bit of perhaps regrettable runtime reflection, introspection. Basically every function has a dot length, and inside the internals of Express it uses the dot length to determine if it's an error handler or if it is a non-error handler. So if the length is 4, it's an error handler. That's how it works under the sheets. Anyway, so here I put ellipses ... but this is where all that stuff I was talking about goes. This is where you can potentially classify your error or handle them in a different way. There's of course exceptions to every rule. I think there's a place where we had a Excel sheet or a PDF or something, and because that was different from all the other stuff, we had to handle the error there in a different way. But generally, you can put all your error stuff in one place, and then you can twist the knobs on it in that one place where your error handling goes, and then that's where your error logging goes as well. So you print it out to the console, you send out the email, you put it in the Slack channel, you send the user the error ID that they can call customer support with, whatever.
I think we had a incident where MySQL was throwing an error duplicate entry for like foreign key constraints, and I remember we talked about this. It was like, well, I need to reshape the error, but you're like, no, just let it bubble its way out.
Yeah, and then we ended up getting all the routing information because what we did was I should have put this in the slide because it's really useful and really simple, but rec.url and rec.method. So you'll have a rec.url and rec.method, and you can put that on the error object so that both if you ask the user to go into the debug console, which hopefully you don't have to do, but you know, you do. Or if you need to look at the logs, you can see this was the method that was called and the URL that was called. It lets you know at least we can trace it down to this is the place that it came from.
I would suggest giving that a named function there instead of the anonymous function, just like handle error.
Agreed.
Even if there is a problem in your error handler, then that could get bubbled up to the
Yes.
process level.
Yes. So this is one of the things that I hate about presentation slides and readmes is that we often make poor choices that we wouldn't make in the real world because we're trying to fit them on slides and make a 3-line example in a README instead of an 8-line example in a README. But I actually did, I take that advice in just a couple of slides to break that down. So I also want to show, I don't think that you commonly need this, but occasionally it happens that you do need to scope an error handler to something because the way that it works. So for example, most of your API is JSON, but one of the places in your API handles a CSV generator. And so that particular piece needs a different error handler because of what it does. So you can scope error handlers, and then you can also inline error handlers. So it is possible to put the function that should respond and then put the error handler after. So I would have actually given this same bit here in that slide, but then it wrapped over the line, and so I didn't. But yeah, and then it is, just like Travis said, it's a good idea to give a name to your error handlers. Okay, so, and oh yeah, so if something goes wrong in the route, rather than handling it, rethrow it. So you can classify it. So a bad day happens. Rather than doing a response right there, this was a bad day, make bad day an error. So classify the error and then pass it along, bubble it up, throw the error. Now, you can also do this pattern this way, where instead of throwing, you call next. But I caution against this just because it's less idiomatic to JavaScript in general. And then you have to make sure that you have the return there, whereas the throw will stop the execution of the program up to that point. So I prefer this. You will see this, but I would say where you see this, try to turn it into that. Now there's some caveats there we're going to run into in just a second. Error handling is probably the biggest discussion because Express is so old. And some people say use Fastify and use these other tools, and if you want to use them, then yes, use them. But Express is very simple if you know the pro tips to get around the little wonky-doos. And if you really need all this, robust type system and robust performance, then use Go, of course. I think Fastify is way too. Somebody gave an excellent. You can check on our YouTube channel. Somebody gave an excellent Fastify presentation. I thought it was so cool, and then I tried it out for a couple of days, and I'm like, this is just not worth it. It's just too much overhead for
the same thing.
Yeah, but because you could just use Go or Rust, and then you could use a framework that has all of those features built in, where it's not all this just mountains of extra boilerplate. Anyway, so back to this: let errors bubble until they burst. Correct or classify, but do not catch. So we kind of talked about not catching, or when you catch to correct and classify. So we talked about classification error right here. Now we're going to talk about a correction. So let's say you've got some bad sign-up UI. Everybody's encountered this. So the problem with it is that the two buttons are sign up and sign in, so they look identical when you just, they got all the same letters almost when you're just casually glancing at them. And then they both have a sign in with Facebook and sign in with Google button. And then they both have a username and password. So you can click either one, and there's pretty much no difference except for the word sign up or sign in, right? We've all encountered this? Okay, and then what's the next thing that happens? You click this Google sign in button, and it says user already exists. Really? Like, Like I click Google sign in and because I was on the sign up page instead of the sign in page, you're gonna tell me I can't no. So this is just the perfect example though of doing a correction of an error. So you can check the error code, and let's say that the error code that was thrown in that situation was user exists. So what we can say is, well, if the user exists is the error, that's an error that we can correct. Because whether they give us the username and password, or whether they sign in with Google, we can easily correct that error on our end. So we say, okay, if it's not a correctable error, then just throw the error. We can't correct it, let it bubble up. But if we can get a little bit further, let's try to log in the user. And if it's got their Google token and it's a valid Google token, great, we just log them in. And if it's got their Google token but it's a malicious Google token, then great, we throw the bad Google token error. And same thing with their username and password. If their username exists, well, just go on and check their password. Because if their password is the same password that they're already using, just log them in. So I think that's kind of a great example for that particular scenario. Okay, so we're almost halfway through here. Do we have any questions up to this point? It gets a little bit quicker after this, I think, for most of it. Okay, I'm just going to go on. So the next thing is, now all the stuff that I told you, the problem with all that is the reason that people do all the wonky do's that they do is because they're not using await correctly, and so then they have to do all these try catches, and then they're trying to do their error handling, and because they can't figure out how to get it to bubble up, and so the thing is, you got to use await correctly, and unfortunately this is not in the Express documentation. Well, I think it is in the documentation for V5, which has been sitting in beta for the last 5 years. I don't think V5 is ever going to be released. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel super comfortable about using something that's just sitting in beta for 5 years. So the number one thing is that we can't use callbacks if we're going to use Express correctly and have errors bubble up. Because if you throw an error in a callback, the behavior is literally undefined. In the specification for JavaScript, it says, meh. So that's the worst.
Is that a direct quote?
I think so. So don't use callbacks. Oh, and sorry for the people that are joining in online. I haven't been checking comments. Let me just check real quick. See, okay. Nobody's got any questions there. So we don't use callbacks. This is what the callback looks like. And the problem is that we get in this pattern of you just have to have this boilerplate over and over again where you've got the if error, next error, return. And then, in everything you do, you got to do that. That's the old days. We don't want to ignore errors. So if you just say, oh, it's an async function, I'm going to await it. Well, this is actually the same thing as throwing in a callback because from the perspective of Express, it doesn't know what to do with a promise because it was made far before promises were standardized. It was made back around 2009, I think. Maybe 2008, maybe 2010. But promises weren't standardized until 2012 or something.
Is that why you wrote async router?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that. Yeah, so Express V5 is probably never going to happen. If Express V5 ever comes out, then this is valid. Okay, and then don't try on async. So you say, oh, okay, well, I'll just have this async, and then I'll just wrap the whole thing, and then you've got this big try-catch block. And it's kind of arguable. My next solution, you could argue, well, this actually looks a little bit better maybe. But my final solution is hands down the winner. But anyway, so what happens, the thing I don't like about try-catch is it just doesn't have a very good flow because it feels like an if-else. And you shouldn't have, basically a try-catch should be at max 3 lines long. And the only thing that should be in the try are the variables that are related to what's being tried and the function that can possibly throw. You shouldn't have a million things in a try-catch, lots of things which cannot throw, because then that's confusing to the reader. How am I supposed to know which of these things are you trying? Because if you're trying 1 plus 2, 1 plus 2 can't fail, so that doesn't make sense to try. That's certainly going to succeed. And so I just think semantically, try isn't the right tool for the job. But what this technically it works. It's better than a lot of the other solutions, or the non-solutions at least. But then you have your next down at the bottom, and you've just got a big try block. And then another one is you could go crazy catch, which this kind of makes sense because if you're going to await something, then you can dot catch it, and then you can either correct or classify or rethrow. But then you have to say you're going to catch this and it's going to next it, but then next doesn't rethrow, so it doesn't halt the execution. So then you have to test for it, and then you just end up repeating this boilerplate. So that's not great. Or you can use the poor man's Express v5 upgrade. And I recommend doing this if you're writing a library that you're going to export somewhere else. This is how I recommend you do it, because this is semantically correct. This communicates the intent of what you're doing. You're taking a callback and you are promisifying it. And you could even write an express promisify function. Only problem with that is that you lose a little bit of the stack information, and so this is perhaps a better approach for code that you're going to export out to other programmers, something that is useful is reusable. You just put promise.resolve.then, there's your async function, and then .catch next.
So what if you put an immediately invoked async function, anonymous async function? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, this works too. I was just wondering, could I do it that way too?
Should you do that and then just put the .catch on it?
Oh wait, no.
I think that should work, actually.
So there's multiple.
I will add that to the slide because I think that might actually be a little bit cleaner. That's a good idea.
My man.
Quirky. Yeah.
You're saying you just start the line at the async?
Yeah, so you could just, if you just got rid of this, and then you
Just made
put
it
an
immediate, yeah.
invocation here, then you could get rid of the promise.resolve.then because the async syntax sugar already creates that. I'm not sure what that does to the stack trace. I'm not sure if it's better or worse.
Yeah.
But here's the best solution. Well, and then so then what I was going to say is then you've got all your stuff here, and you can do await, and then if you don't correct or classify and you just let it bubble up, then it's going to go to your default error handling. But the best solution is that I found this thing that somebody had. It had, I think, between 0 and 2 stars when I found it. And it was the exact perfect solution because I went looking for a solution. I thought, somebody's got to have a simple solution. And people were rewriting Express, or they had these middleware that require that you change the API of how you do your functions, or just all sorts of weird stuff. And then this guy, he basically had a bug in the code around the error handling. And so I just patched it, and then it was several years old, so he didn't respond. But his code was clean, it was concise, it was exactly pretty much what I would have done if I had written it myself. So I just forked it and published it as async router. And then all you gotta do is make a one-line change, and then you get the hypothetical Express v5 type of thing where you get to use your async function. So you don't have to do anything crazy or complicated. It stays super simple, it's lean, it's clean, it looks great. And this is literally about 50 lines of wrapper code. So it's just going over the .get, the .patch, and then it does an async await deal, and then it does wraps it in a try catch, and then it rethrows it. And, so it's I think the best
Everybody has
stopgap solution. Okay. And then we can kind of breeze through this pretty quickly and get on to our next presentation. So another thing is use.json. So you see a lot of people use res.send. I don't understand why this is. I think, again, it might be for cuteness because you can create an example where you have no idea what the data is and you just send it back. There's a problem if you don't know what data you're sending back to the user. I don't know what function this serves in real code. I think it can send buffers. I think that might be what it is. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever had a use case where I needed .send. Use .json because .json clearly communicates this is supposed to be JSON. So if I see something else that isn't JSON, if I see a buffer or I don't know, I know that it was an accident, that it's not intentional. And it's the same amount of typing too. It's got some of the same letters in it, S in it. So there's no, I can't think of any reason why you would ever use .send when you can use .json.
I don't remember the reason, but there was a reason. I do recall that from years ago, but I do not remember the reason they had back in like Express 3 or whatever. What was that?
Is it just because of sending HTML?
I think it's because they're overloading .render .stream, .json. I think they have a if statement switch or something, and .send that just figures out whatever you want to do and does it. But again, just use the .pipe. If you need to send a pipe, use .pipe, res.pipe. If you need to send JSON, use res.json. If you need to send, if you need to render HTML, use .render. We have.
And I think there's a .text, or there used to be.
Quite possibly. Yeah, what if I'm returning a simple MP3 file? .pipe. .pipe would be the thing to use. You'd use fs.createReadStream and then res.pipe. If you don't do that, then you'll end up with memory, what's the word I'm looking for? Memory leak. Right? Well, it's not necessarily a memory leak because the memory will go away, but you'll bloat. You'll bloat your memory usage during peak times. And then this unambiguous and communicates intent was supposed to go with that, but it fell over. Next is the power prefixes. Again, this is pretty quick. /API. Everything that you do in Express should begin with /API. That will give you better cache control between your assets and your dynamic responses. It gives you better cookie and token control. And perhaps most importantly, your HTTP routing, which some people refer to as their CDN routing, gives you control over that. So you can section off, this is stuff that are cached assets, that require cookies, that whatever, and this is stuff that uses the API, and that's JSON, and that's dynamic and shouldn't be cached. So it gives you a nice clean separation where you can set the right headers here and the right headers there. And if you want max effect, you can also just have an API subdomain, or not also just, but having an API subdomain or a separate domain between your API and your site might be enjoyable as well. But for the portability between environments, I'd recommend having /API even if you do the subdomain thing, because it doesn't cost you anything extra, and then it's easier to share among developers that are working on local hosts where you don't have the extra subdomain, typically. And this is the principle of gatekeepers at the gate and doorkeepers at the doors as well. So this the security implications. So you can have an API public. You don't require an API token for that. API user needs an API token. API sudo. Not only does it need an API token, it needs an API token that's scoped to the developers or the back office managers, etc. And local celebrity Ethan Garofalo, author of Practical Microservices, had this to say: use enough middleware so that by the time the request gets to your handler, all your preconditions are met. So what this might look like, I kind of used some dumb names that didn't have a lot of thought in them, but again, slides. So API user, you could have a .use, and anything that goes through this prefix, the precondition must be met, must user. Must have a token, the token must represent a user, whatever that ends up meaning for you. And then, you have your API.get, and then you could have some friends, and because you have this .use here, and because it has the prefix, then, everything that begins with API user, you don't have to repeat this, different nuances of the same security code over and over again. You got one gatekeeper at the gate, and then you can put your doorkeeper at the door. You want to get some information about this friend ID, then you're going to have some sort of, I guess this actually should have been in two pieces. It should have been must have friend and then get friend, because the idea being that in order to get information about a friend, you must have been given access to them, and then you would get the information. But again, slides. Oh yeah, here I actually broke that down a little bit more. So here we have /API assets. So think about Facebook, images, profile pictures can be public or private. That's the use case we're talking about here. So maybe this is a user or maybe it's a bot, but we're going to authenticate it some way. It needs to be maybe user or maybe bot. And then when we go to get the assets, friends pick, friend ID, we're going to get the profile picture, maybe pick public. So any of, what I mean by maybe is that it goes through this middleware and maybe it can use the token or maybe it can't. Maybe it can use the condition or maybe it can't. But then at some point we have a must. So must have friend maybe can get skipped if, maybe you can have a if public next might be inside there. But then must view pick. So if it can't view pick because it's public and it can't view the pick because it has a friend, then it stops here. then we error out. And then at the very end, get user pick. So questions about this, because I think this is one of the most important pro tips I've got for you is this.
What was the difference of the array syntax and the use? Like instead of multiple arguments, it was like you had a...
There is no difference other than if you want to be able to compose it in a package and export it so that it can be used somewhere else, you would need to put it in an array. So if I wanted all of this to be in my friends package and I wanted a friend.handle profile pic, then I could put all of these in an array and I could export that. The array could be named handle profile pic, and the array could be all of these middleware.
It's handing all those together essentially in one step. Kind of.
Well, you call next on the middleware. So if you don't call next, then you handle it.
So if you have the maybe pick public, so why would you have a maybe pick public and then have some musts behind it?
Well, because at some point you have to check the conditions. So this could have been called maybe have friend.
Yeah, well I was thinking like, would it be better to like say this is the wrong route for that, go check this one and just get my public whatever on that route?
So I'm demonstrating the, so I don't disagree with that. But what I'm demonstrating here is kind of the idea of the Facebook profile pic. When you right click on someone's profile pic, if it's a public picture, you can open up a private browser and you can navigate to that picture because the picture is public. And if you are logged in and the picture isn't public, then the cookie is used. So there are occasions, I think that what you're describing is probably a more sound routing strategy. But I think that this comes up where you have something where it sometimes matters if the user is authenticated, but it sometimes doesn't. And it might be easiest for the other parts of your system to not have to have logic, because then you would have to know ahead of time, how do I know that John's profile picture is public or not? You know?
So in the case of that maybe public handler, if it was deemed like, oh yeah, worldly accessible, you would return it, but not next, and then it wouldn't get into these must handlers.
Well, what I would do is I would just have some sort of check on the condition. So must have friend, I would just have a skip condition in it that it would next. If it's like, if this is public, then I don't need this, so I'll just next it.
Is there like a context property that you can like tweak the state as it goes down the next chain?
So yeah, just the request object.
Just appends whatever you want in there.
Yeah, and technically they have a solution for this. You're supposed to set it on the response object, but then it activates some of the rendering machinery. And so it ends up being much more convenient. I mean, rec.user is not defined by Express, but everybody uses rec.user. And that's, yeah, so you could have, yeah, I didn't think through this really well enough to describe it in so much detail because slides. But that is it's a good question, and there's nuance here that if if we were actually designing this, all of these questions we want to bring to the table and discuss and say, well, how is the front end going to handle this situation? And could we handle this in a better way so that we're optimizing this so that we return early? Could we compose the get user pick into the maybe pick public so that it can return early or whatever? And how do we communicate that in the name of it so that it's clear that this might be a style? Because you have a difference between, you have middleware and you have handlers, which I'll touch on that a bit later too. But middleware, usually middleware will pass things through. They'll modify and pass things through unless they detect an error. So auth detects an error and then it throws the error. And handlers should never, with a little asterisk because there's always an exception, some exceptional case, but handlers should never call next because handlers should handle the thing. And there's some details about state that I'll get to. So anything else? Okay. And then just some more stuff similar. So API sudo, we want to ensure auth. So must user, and then I think I renamed those must, and I didn't rename these must, but whatever. Must auth, must super user, and then just stupid example. If we're gonna on the back end, we've received the picture of the user. We're doing peoplemeet.com, and people send in their driver's license to verify who they are, and so somebody on the back end has got super user privileges to add their verified driver's license, whatever. So we're gonna validate the license data, and then if the license data is valid, then we go ahead and update it. But anyway, the idea is just you can use an excessive amount of middleware to be able to segment out. So when you look at what the route does, you kind of read and understand what the route does rather than having a big function that's 100 lines long. And then you've got pieces, especially when it's related to this idea of gatekeepers of the gate, doorkeepers of the door. You can decide, okay, is this something that goes at the main gate, the .use API sudo, or is this something that goes at the door, down in the dot post that's used on some routes or something like that. And then I also think that, just like we discussed earlier, I think it's actually better in many cases to not have these 5 or 6 routes, but instead just have a friend package that puts all of these routes in an array and then exports it, so it's just API assets friend pick friend dot show pick or whatever. And I'll show that in a second too, I think. But the primary purpose of this is we're reducing the surface area of the gating errors by doing that. And this leads us into top-level routing as well. So I already talked about this a little bit. There's this excellent talk by Matt Ryer called How I Write HTTP Services After 8 Years. And he's primarily a Go developer, but the principle, I think, applies to any language. What you find is that you want to have your routes centralized in one place. It just makes it easier. He says it really well. If you have one place for all your routes, you find that most code maintenance, which you tend to have it, in your application, you tend to have to do code maintenance as it grows. So most code maintenance starts with the URL. We already talked about, you probably want to put your URL in your error message so it can help you trace it. And so it's handy to have one place to look. So instead of having, as you start refactoring and you move this route over here and you move this route over here, move the handlers, but just keep the routes in one place. And then you can go to the route and say, yeah, we refactored that. It's this handler now. Rather than having to go through 100 different handlers and figure out which handler, which package is handling this route. You got all the routes in one place, and that's the index. So one of the things that defies the decentralization method. Okay, and then we have So this is just kind of exactly me talking about this. So this is kind of how I prefer to do it, like that. So you can make a mini app. If you need to do sub-routers or weird stuff or conditional logic, you can use the mini app, express.router. You can create as many express.routers as you want. There's no real negative penalty to it. Or you can put things in an array, or you can just have one single export. But however you mask it, you can just expose it like this, and it's very clean and simple. Okay, so we're almost done here. .get versus .use. This is something that I just mentioned a minute ago. So .use is special in the same way that app, the express invocation that gives you the server app is different from the router that gives you the router app. .use and then the other ones are different. .use is similar to the big app in that it manages state, and that state persists as the middleware trickles through to its final destination. And it's predominantly, it should be used predominantly for middleware, although occasionally you may have handlers in a .use. So for routers or for mini apps, and it can respond, but typically when it responds, typically it's an error that it's responding with, whatever goes in the .use. Now in the .get, on the other hand, some of the state resets. So if you set some state in a .get and then you call .next, and it goes into the next .get. So say you have two .gets. I should have given an example of this that's more concrete. But say you had .get/handler1, .get/handler2. And handler1 fails. Now if they're in an array, the state will persist. But if they're separate .get handlers, some of the state, some of the rec.whatever that you set will be gone in the next handler. And this is very confusing. And in particular, if you ever accidentally put a middleware, something that's intended to be a middleware, at the end of a .get that can fall into another .get, you can get weird bugs. Again, I've spent 2-4 hours debugging something that ended up just being state variable stuff that I would have never figured out where it was in the code. I just realized, oh wait, this is not supposed to be .get, it's not supposed to be .use. Fix that. And then all of a sudden everything worked. It's like, what? So the last thing in your .get array should respond. So this was I think this was one of the things that had me caught up for an hour or two. It was something similar to this. I think it was one of the ones that did rendering as well. But if you did a .get on express static rather than a .use, then weird stuff happens. It doesn't work. You don't get the responses that you expect. You get weird error messages that don't actually tell you what the problem is. And then JSDoc and TSC, I'm going to refer you to JS with types. So there's a link here. Josh, will you help me to remember to put this link back to the beginning under useful links as well? So I'm just going to breeze through this one. But this is really helpful to have type hinting in your code. So there's @types express, and you can then just decorate your functions with @type import express.handler for middleware. Or if it's a handler, well, you still actually decorate it with the same thing because the function signature for express is the same even though they're semantically different. And then if it's an error handler, then it's error request handler. So you can decorate your functions, and what this does is it'll give you type hinting on the stuff that you're doing to let you know, rec.query.whatever is a string, not a number, because you've got your query parameters and you pass in a number, and then you use it as a number, and then you get a bug. You've got something like this. Rec.query.id is a number, or is a string, not a number. Oh yeah, I need to parse in that, whatever. So it's that if you decorate these with the types, then you're tooling. If you use those tools, then you can get good handlers. And then if you need to have special modifications, like for example, you need a rec.user, this is pretty common, whoops, then what you can do is you can update your types.js, which again, I'm not going to go into that here. I'll refer you to that other bit, but just overview. If you can have a types.js and say, okay, I've got my user, I'm going to define my user, and it's an object. Whoops, this is actually a typo. I will fix that. That should say object there, and then my user here. But you typedef that, and it's an object with a name that's a string. And then you create a file called typings express index.d.ts, and then you basically just override the interface of the request object and say, now rec has rec.user. And so then you can get your type hints and stuff with that. And then your jsconfig.json would change to adding some type roots and to making sure that you include your code as well as your types. So won't go into that anymore, but if you're interested in JS with types, I'll refer you to that link. And then there's the caddy file. This is a hidden gem. This is a hidden gem because what you don't want to do in your development is deal with the HTTP stuff, the file serving, or in production. You don't want Express to actually do your file serving and your static asset serving. You want Caddy to handle that. Caddy is the modern web server. And it works in localhost with HTTPS, which is what sets it apart from the vintage, your old Apache, your old Nginx, the old crufty stuff. Caddy, even in development, can produce HTTPS certificates that work on your local environment. It'll actually add it to your system password keychain and certificate store. So pop up and ask you for your password and say, Caddy wants to add a certificate to your system chain. You say, okay, and then everything's going to operate the same on your machine with HTTPS as it would in production. And then it's very, very easy to use. You say, oh, everything that goes to API, this goes back to what I said before. If you use routing to distinguish your API and Express from your public CDN assets, whatever, then you say, okay, I want to reverse proxy from, you're going to go to localhost, you're going to use this URL in your browser, and then it's going to proxy to this URL where your Node app is running, and then everything else it's going to serve from your public folder. So, and that's as simple as it is. So super, 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 super awesome Really, really simple. Oh, and I should have put, Josh, will you remind me to put the caddy run command as well? Because I forgot to put the run command. But basically, this is your file, and you just do caddy run config, point it to that file, and then you're off to the races. Honorable mention, base tag. So base tag makes it so if you have code presently in your current code base that looks like this, base tag allows you to have code that looks like this instead. So base tag gives you a $sign. It basically, this works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It works in the CI/CD environments. It works in your deployment environments. It creates a directory symlink, which even works on Windows without administrator privileges, and then allows you to be able to reference things like you would in a sane HTTP framework by the package path rather than by all this relative nonsense. So all you have to do for that is npm install save base tag and then npx base tag rebase. And what that will do is it will crawl your folders and it will take all the things that have reverse relative paths and it will change them to forward absolute paths. And what I mean by reverse and forward is if you're going down a directory, it's easy to reason in your brain, okay, I'm in this directory and I'm going down these two directories. But it's difficult to reason in your brain, I'm going up 3 directories, where does that land me? So you can use it for for everything, but the rebase command will handle the case that is the most terrible on your brain. And then this is just, you can copy and paste this. This just adds it to your package.json so that when other developers clone and run npm CI, that it does the right thing and they end up with the symlink and yada, yada, yada. But my caution on that is base tag solves a problem that you shouldn't have. So you shouldn't be reaching for base tag because you shouldn't have this problem. Your code shouldn't look like this. It's just when you're coming into a code base that already looks like this and it's just a mess to be able to go through files and figure out what the heck is going on. It's difficult to refactor because you can't see the paths of where things are. That's where base tag comes into play. But if you've designed your API cautiously from the beginning, you won't end up in this area where you have all of these, maybe you'll have one double dot, but you won't have 2, 3, 4, 5 double dots. Reverse padding. And then lastly, any other questions up to this point? All right, so lastly, some helpful resources. If you want to learn about JWTs, a lot of people have questions about JWTs, or if you want to learn about cookies, here's some useful resources. I will put these at the front of the slides too, Josh, if you'll help me remember that. And then libauth isn't ready yet, but this is something I'm working on that basically gives you Google Auth and some other things pretty much for free. So Auth0 without Auth0, where you're not putting your security in the hands of some company that goes down once a month. Does anybody use Auth0 in production? Okay, because I've worked at a couple companies where Auth0 is used in production, and the security benefit is great because most teams, they don't have the first clue about security, and so Auth0 is probably one of the best solutions, Auth0, Okta, whatever, but they don't have perfect uptime. You'd have better uptime. So many of these things, CDNs and so much of this stuff, you'd have better uptime if you just if you just run it on your own. And also control. Users are actually really important. One of my issues with the cloud is that you're giving away all your intellectual property. If you give away all your intellectual property, what are you giving back to your investors? Well, I guess you're giving them monthly revenue, so they don't care where the intellectual property is. But it's just scary to me if you don't own your intellectual property. And users aren't property, but your users are basically, to use the crude term, they're your most important asset because they are what allow your business to work at all. And so, just philosophically, morally, I don't really jive with the idea of outsourcing users because it's just too core. But I do understand the security needs to be there, and so libauth is up and coming, and it is basically you run libauth init and require that file and then put in your Google ID and you're good. So for those of you watching online in here, do I have any C++ tips? I do not, but we will defer to Will later on for that. Like, sub, follow if you want to. Any last Q&A before we switch over to Kaleb's presentation? All right, well, thanks. All right, Kaleb, can you take the hot seat? Yes. This should be, in theory, as simple as
But is
All right.
it ever really that simple in here?
No, it is now because we got the special cable that goes to the TV instead of going through the Zoom call system.
Zoom call system is elaborate. I think the Minotaur's still down there. Frustrated with the whole thing.
Is this Thunderbolt or USB-C?
USB-C.
Oh, wow.
This is gonna be long enough.
That's crazy.
Or do we have a?
Right here?
That is so cool.
I may have a coupler. Let me see if I got a coupler.
It's like ZRX to like use the
Or wait. No. We're good. We're good because it's just right here. Yeah, we just plug it in here. We're good.
That'll be sick.
I'll go to the TV.
What device is this?
it's called Neova. It was like a Kickstarter.
All right, let's see here.
Apparently you guys have thicker.
And then give me just a couple seconds here. I'm going to retitle this. Oh, good. We've got something. I think. Is that you?
Super.
Ben.
Yep.
It's just the basics.
That's
so
cool.
far.
All right. So this one is JavaScript on the edge.
I thought it was gonna be.
Yep.
Very cool title. And then you're going to have to tell me how to spell your name.
Kaleb,
Is that open
ERCANBRACK.
source or what's that?
That? I got it?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Okay. It's web what? MIDI? Oh,
All
so
right.
it's for music? Or audio?
So,
Oh.
yeah, I'll be talking about JS on the edge. Although,
Wait. Let me give you a proper introduction here. So everybody, welcome back again! Woo! Welcome again to Node.js. Like, follow, sub, etc. if you want. This is Kaleb, and I will give the dignity of properly trying to pronounce your name and not just copping out like a wuss.
is
Wait,
okay.
Ercanbrack.
Nope.
Dang it.
It's just Ercanbrack.
Ercanbrack.
Just phonetic.
Phonetic in
The-
English, maybe.
Yeah, the
Spanish.
German origin is like Ercanbrack.
Yeah, I like that more.
Something like, yeah, that's
you go
cooler.
by that.
But they wanted to Americanize it when they came to America, like hundreds of years ago.
Anyway, he's going to talk about JavaScript on the edge. So all that stuff about keeping your intellectual property or using Express, forget about it.
Yeah. So yeah, JS on the edge. That's what I just kept the title as originally. I feel like this title is not the best fitting now because I've gone through like 2 or 3 versions of these slides as I've learned more. I got it. I was originally searching like edge rendering, and it kind of led me down a whole bunch of rabbit holes. And I'm like, oh, these rabbit holes are cooler. It's still related, so maybe it's not terrible. Oh yeah, so Kaleb Ercanbrack, UI developer, or like JavaScript in general, but I focus on UI. But I think everything about development is awesome, so I try to be familiar with a lot of it. And you can go to these slides here if you want to follow along. So what is the edge? So the edge is basically serverless, and serverless is like running some piece of code for only as long as it takes. And so you only pay for that amount of time that it took. You do that, but closer to people, or closer to where your users are. And then edge rendering is, there's nothing really different besides rendering other than it just takes place in a different spot in the world. So yeah, that's what I originally was going to talk about. I'm like, oh, that's boring. But edge, or serverless edge, I'm just going to call it edge, differs from traditional serverless computing. And I say traditional even though serverless isn't even that old. But it is what it is. There's things like AWS Lambda, where you, I think you can give it a Docker container now.
But you can give it like you give it your code and it sticks into a runtime that AWS hosts and runs it. And then they measure some stuff and then they bill you with whatever it took to run it. They have Edge, so it's running their Lambda functions all around the world. Google Cloud Run is very similar. It's that you just give it only a Docker image or Docker container or something with Docker. And basically it's just like running your code on a variety of VMs which are running, usually it's Docker. But they all have one issue. When you're trying to run things as quick as possible for users on the edge or throughout the world. And that's cold starts. And that is the time that it takes to kind of start up your function or your app or whatever for it to do whatever runtime setup it needs to. If it's in a container, start up the Docker container. And cold starts, this time, it's going to happen with anything. It's just like right now how it currently works. It can take anywhere from like, I forgot to put this graph. There was a graph here that showed like average performance for Lambda with like Node, Python, Java, and C#. And like for the Node thing, it was like half a second to like 1.5 seconds, and then all the way to like C# was about, I don't know, it got up to like 3 seconds. So that might not seem very long, but for some businesses that can make or break a lot of things, especially when most people, I think if a page takes longer than like a second to load, they leave it. So that is a problem, but we really like using containers. I really don't know how often it is that you use containers versus just using a Java or a Node or Python runtime, because containers are just easy and they're easy to develop with. But yeah, so how do we keep those benefits of containers, but still, reduce the cold start time? And that kind of brings up, this is where JavaScript comes into it, funnily enough. And this is kind of a buzzwordy thing, but JavaScript containers, which is basically V8 isolates and WebAssembly. So V8 isolates, this is how V8 sandboxes JavaScript. They start up very fast. You can have thousands of them in a runtime at once. It's continuously, and you can start up 1,000 of them. So you can just start the V8 runtime once, and you can start each isolate individually several thousands of times during that one runtime is running. And it's much quicker than going through through a VM or through Docker starting the container and doing all that setup. And then I got a lot of how V8 isolates work from Cloudflare worker documentation, because the actual V8 website looks terrible, and because I'm a zoomer, if it doesn't look good, I don't look at it.
Is the isolates how Dino is doing it for their cloud?
Yeah, so Dino, Cloudflare workers and Dino deploy are kind of the two big players, and I talk more about them later. But this whole like using V8 and its isolates, it's more so that than the WebAssembly, I feel. Mm-hmm. That's where a lot of the what I think is the cool edge stuff. Mm-hmm. There are advances in like just doing it the more traditional way that I said earlier, but this is cooler because it's JavaScript. Nice. And so how can you kind of think of this as like containers? And that's where like the Docker daemon is replaced with the V8 runtime. Then starting the container is the V8 isolates being started and stopped. But how do you get your images created? And that would be where WebAssembly comes in. So WebAssembly is a compile target, can run in a web environment, and here we mean V8. WebAssembly, several languages can be compiled to it. Most popular I've seen is Rust as far as like tooling, or probably C++. But it runs at near native speeds, and then since it's in the V8 isolates, it's also sandboxed. There is some caveats, or like near native speed sounds really good, but it's currently, I think currently, at least a few years ago, it was actually quicker to interact with DOM APIs through just JavaScript than through whatever WebAssembly you're importing. So it's not faster at everything, but some things it is much faster. And then I guess to give some validity to that, there's a tweet from the co-creator of Docker, instead of WASM plus, or WebAssembly plus WASI, which is a WebAssembly system interface. That's, if I understand it correctly, it's running WebAssembly outside of a web environment. I didn't really look much into that. Yeah, I said if that existed in 2008, wouldn't have needed Docker. So yeah, that's cool. But so how do you get started actually using some of the things in this? So right now, the big workers I've seen are Cloudflare workers, and Dino deploy. Cloudflare Vercel Edge functions are powered by Cloudflare workers. It's on Cloudflare's own network, so they don't use, because Cloudflare has their own data servers or data centers. And its documentation is definitely better than Dino deploys. And there's been, it seems like there's a lot more of an ecosystem for it. And the Dino deploy powers Netlify and Supabase, which Supabase is like an open source Firebase. But it's got much faster deployment than Cloudflare. I believe Cloudflare says up to 30 seconds, and then Dino deploy is like less than a second to get it throughout the entire world, which is nuts. And I think they have a better free tier if you want to just play around with it.
That's a dangerous trap.
Alright, so here's some limitations. So the maximum app size, so that's the total JavaScript and like WebAssembly that you can import, though realistically most of the time it's just all JavaScript still, is a max of 1 megabyte. And that's kind of worrying me because I was trying out some simple demos with some web frameworks like Nux.js, which is Next, which is React server-side rendering, but Nuxt is for Vue. And they have a build that's supposed to be optimized for the Cloudflare worker or on Dino deploy. And its minimum size, it was like just one component, was like 300 kilobytes. And I'm like, I feel like you can't grow that much without worrying about that. I don't know what sets this limit. On their paid plans, it's all 1 megabyte, so I don't know if it's like a technical limitation or they just don't want to.
They don't want you installing NPM on their cloud servers.
Yeah. And so something else with these edge runtimes is that you don't have access to Node in them. One reason for that is because I guess some parts of the Node API doesn't, there's some security issues with the isolates.
You don't want access to the file system.
Yeah, it's something, they're slowly working on like either introducing their own versions of those Node APIs to address that. That's all. I didn't have more time to really look into that. There's a JS Party podcast that talked about it. I think I link it later in the slides. The Dino deploy has just got a much bigger app size, though I'm guessing that's because, Dino, I don't know, actually. I don't know why they have such a bigger app size. Because Dino, like, you can reference, you just import code from wherever, and so that a lot of apps just have you reaching out to like GitHub repositories where their code isn't minified. So I guess maybe that works out to about the same if you were just minify everything, but you can still minify and get a much smaller build size or app or size for your function. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what determines that. Oh yeah, and then memory usage when it's running 512 megs versus 128 megs up here. And then Dino doesn't have Node APIs because it is Dino. Although it doesn't actually have all of Dino's APIs either. It's got this kind of stripped down version of Dino, kind of like how there's a stripped down version of Node. And that these runtimes, they're being somewhat standardized. Oh, that's a different window. Winter CG. It's a web interoperable runtimes community group.
That did not show up.
Oh, let me. Go. There we go. So it started by Dino and Cloudflare, and that's just to like standardize what exactly is available in these edge runtimes, because it's kind of crazy right now. Oh, and Shopify is actually, they've got their own, I don't know if they're using one of these two, but they have Oxygen, which is their version of this, or their edge platform. I don't know if it's running on either of these two, but they're kind of newer to the space. Yeah, so that's kind of the limitations with the runtimes. But there is something else to consider, which is just because you can distribute all your, I don't know, it can be intriguing to be like, oh, I can put my web app on here, and then it's just super easy to communicate, or it can get super quick time to first byte times all throughout the world. But that won't be true, because if everything else isn't also distributed throughout the world, it's going to do a lot of walking around to get whatever it needs. Usually it's like, I don't know, like twice as long as if you had just had your function, if you just had your app running in Illinois. So if you had your app running in Australia and your database is in Illinois, it's got to go all the way back to Illinois, and then all the way back to Australia, when it would have been quicker to just have your app also in Illinois, so it only goes to Illinois, less times. So there's kind of nothing to do really get around that, but for the kind of companies that I think would benefit most from that, I'm guessing they already have a lot of stuff distributed.
Isn't Dino working on something about that? I thought I was listening, that's where I heard about the isolate thing. I thought they had said they're working.
Oh wait, yes, there is something, because Cloudflare is also working on one.
Oh, maybe it's Cloudflare, I think they're right on.
Maybe. They've got, Cloudflare has this kind of like cache storage. They call it KV, or like key value. That works as a cache, but that's also distributed. I think it's also running in a worker, or like that's how they're powering it. So things like that could probably fix it. But this whole like idea of just running everything in a slimmed down runtime in V8 all around the world, it's pretty new, so things are still coming up every day. Oh, where am I? Oh, this is supposed to come before this one.
Just real quick to riff on that a little bit. So with the KV store that they also have, it's called durable objects, which is essentially like a smart object. So one of the slight downsides of the KV store is because it has to ripple all of the changes out across the whole edge. You could sometimes get like a read that hasn't, it's eventually consistent.
Yeah.
But with the durable objects, what I've learned is that they do some pretty intelligent distributing of that singleton around the edge of like who's actually using it.
Yeah.
And so it's like fast where it's being accessed.
Yeah, I remember that was also talked about on the JS Party podcast. Yeah, because they called it a ping pong ball.
Yeah.
It's just going all over. Yeah, there's more. There's a lot more that I was already going down at rabbit holes, and I'm like, I just gotta put something on the sides. So I decided to do like what's an easy way to get into it. So there's some frameworks that have popped up or created easy ways to deploy to it. So Nuxt, like I talked about earlier, which is for server-side rendering view. Something common across all of these, except for Dino or Fresh here, is you'll compile or you'll build your app with an adapter, and that's taking like the output that the app builds and then making it compatible with whatever runtime that it's going to be going on to. Fresh, it only, well, you could probably get it to work on Cloudflare Workers if you make an adapter for it, or just change its output to work with it. Because in the end, it's just JavaScript, and if it as a runtime gets standardized, you should be able to move between the two.
Is Fresh only on the Dino Cloud thing, or does it work just with the Dino?
So it works. You can use it as just a standalone Dino. Like if you have a Dino server, you can run Fresh on it, and it'll be fine. They just made it specifically for Dino deploy. So it's like everything, they've made it so like there's no build step. You can just push commit, and then it gets immediately deployed to everything, which has some trade-offs because sometimes the build step is kind of nice. If you're using things like getting Tailwind to work with Fresh, because there's not to do it without it build step, it's impossible because it needs post CSS. There is something called Twind, which is runtime Tailwind, which sounds weird, but it's actually kind of cool. Yeah, Fresh is pretty weird compared to all these other ones. I was going to do some performance benchmarks. I only got around to doing Nuxt because Nuxt is the only one I use. Fresh actually performed the best as far as like it was like server-side rendering of HTML or like a page with one component on it. And I just like hit it with autocannon and see like how many requests per second it could handle, or like, because ideally it'd be like if you have that many users, like yeah. Fresh, I think was around like 7,000 requests per second, and then Nuxt was about 5, and then the rest of these were all. I didn't test Astro because Astro was only like this or last week that it came back onto my radar because it went into V1. But the rest of these were about 3,000 to 4,000 if I remember right. But that's probably not where your performance issues are going to be. So I wouldn't really worry about it too much.
If you want to do more on Astro, I actually rebuilt my site using it. So
I did too. Yeah, it was.
Did you rebuild his site?
No, my site. My site.
You might his works thing now for that.
Yeah, I just forked it. I'll make a pull request. Yeah, typical flow. I already went over this. Most of the time, you have a Git integration that will just deploy it for you. Oh, something else I should check is like the build size, because so Nuxt minimal, like the minimal test that I did, it was like 300 kilobytes, which is pretty big for something like Workers. I'm not sure what these other ones would do. And then Fresh doesn't really apply because it doesn't have a build. It's just running its code without being minified or anything. I kind of went over this. You can get so used to having a node environment that it can be kind of a mental hoop to go through that you're not running in Node anymore. The runtimes that that it provides are based on web standard APIs. So you'll have like your fetch, request, or response. Some of the frameworks provide their own things, which I'm not sure I like about it. So that's just something to be aware of. Is that it's kind of awkward right now developing in it. But I think the applications for it are pretty awesome. Like so, I work at Lingotech. We do translation services. And so I presented this to my team on Monday, and we were thinking like if we had like an SDK written in probably Java, you can compile Java to WebAssembly. Like, would it be like how would it be to have that compile to WebAssembly and then push it to the edge, and then I don't know, just have like some edge function that people can interact with an SDK for, so you don't have to do like an API and an SDK. And they just import it through the WebAssembly module. I don't know. Yeah, so that's about what I got. It's pretty cool stuff that's still really new. There are improvements being made in the traditional space. I just didn't go into them because they didn't interest me as much. But yeah, here's some of the resources. I did link to that podcast episode. And yeah, the end. Any questions or Q&As?
I'm curious, like about like in like a next like build pipeline, like how you could architect it that you're outputting multiple separate worker modules and having those deployed as independent workers instead of one big monolith worker or whatever that it spits out. You break up all your routes into little modules.
Yeah, Next.js I know does something kind of like that, where you can specify specific routes in your app to be hosted on a worker. So I imagine something like that would be doable.
That would keep you under those 1 megabyte limits per.
Yeah, you just have a whole bunch of workers. As long as like, yeah,
And then
if they're just isolated, they don't need to talk to each other.
Yeah, you've got more fidelity over like what access you want, like what headers and stuff or user permissions and stuff per route.
Not a whole lot of WebAssembly examples or like applications for it, or like the ecosystem for it is very small right now because it is new. But like I was also thinking, like if you had your API, could you just, if you had it written in like Java, could you compile your API to WebAssembly and then push that to the edge? Because that would be feasibly could be cheaper and it could be more performant than the regular one.
Have you looked at any of these static site generators that generate WebAssembly from Rust?
No.
There's, I think, at least 2, but there might be something like 5. I think I looked into it a month or so ago.
I've looked at some things. Like I looked at U from Rust.
That's one, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that was a generator.
It does it generates into WebAssembly, but you basically build your static site in it, and it, instead of generating a JavaScript and HTML and CSS, it generates WebAssembly.
Yeah. So like if you built your app in U, that would be easy to, since it can be compiled to it, you could just stick it into a worker or on deploy, Dino deploy. But something else that what's interesting to me is it's what Bun could do there, because this is specifically with V8's isolates, and Bun is using JavaScript core, which I don't remember what it's called, but it does its isolation differently. But that's all I know. It's just different.
Is, Bun is written in Zig, right? Okay. And is JavaScript core also written in Zig, or is it some other library?
I don't know.
I think JavaScript core is Apple's version of V8.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Am I thinking that right? No, it's-
It's on develop.
I'm pretty sure JavaScript core is what Apple calls theirs, and then
Yeah.
Jaeger Monkey or something was what Mozilla called theirs,
Oh.
and then Microsoft they called theirs Chakra, but they just gave up. They knew when it.
The going gets tough quick.
Well, it was the right thing to do. We're all better off for it.
You had your chance with IE, Microsoft.
3 times.
I don't know what it's written in, but it is Apple's.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's probably Objective C.
Mm.
Saturday.
All right. Well, do we have any more questions or feedback for either of us? I think I know for me, I'd like to know what I could do better with this presentation I gave, because I'd like to turn it into lesson material. And then I don't want to speak for you, except I'll speak for you. Kaleb is a new presenter, so I think he could use feedback on what was the most interesting and what could use improvement as well. So
Yeah.
I'll open the time for you to throw bananas and tomatoes at us. The bananas are the good ones that we want. Tomatoes are the bad ones we don't. Jordan.
For Caleb stuff, I think it would have been cool had you didn't have any code examples, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, it would have been cool to see a fresh example and maybe.
Oh wait, I
some-
actually did have one. I did have one for Dino. Oh, that's just because I put my slide down. Let me pull that up and I'll show it in a second. Yeah, because I started on some, but I just never finished them. Because I was trying to get to show how WebAssembly could be used in it, and that's when I was trying to get Rust to compile into WebAssembly, but I just could not get it to work.
You had a Cloudflare domain on your slide presentation for intro, right? Is that to one of your worker projects?
Yeah, well, it was on Vercel. I did actually try posting it or hosting it on Cloudflare, and I put it on Vercel, Netlify, Cloudflare, and Dino, and yeah, just those four, just to see like how easy it was. But yeah, code examples are like actual looking at it was some feedback I got from presenting it on Monday. I just didn't do it. It's
Are you in the Discord channel?
yeah,
Could you drop like links or something in there to look at it?
yeah, that's probably better because this is gonna look really small on there.
Gotta head out. See you guys.
Wait, what?
Should I search for the Discord channel ID?
Utah Node.js, I think. It's probably in the meetup.com information. AJ?
What, huh?
Oh, okay, never mind.
Not this summer. How about yourself?
Well, I went to Vegas.
Oh, okay.
That was pretty cool. I went to Meow and the aquarium.
Nice.
Well, the summer is not over.
No gambling?
No, that's not my
That's
thing.
not, that's probably a good thing.
It's the tax on people who are bad.
Yeah, yeah.
So I put
I mean, there's a chance you can win it, so.
I put the link to it in the Discord.
Awesome.
Actually,
Sweet.
yeah. So that's like their little playground, and that will do a live deployment to their service. So you can visit it, their demo there in like another browser and see it update.
Nice.
And that example, oh, it might actually be broken.
I think the most important takeaway from your presentation are birds aren't real.
Oh,
That's what I
yeah,
took.
my laptop.
That's truth right there.
Birds aren't real?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like right there. It's it.
Oh.
It's the guy I started the group. Birds aren't real. It's hilarious.
Oh,
I
have
even,
no clue what
I might
that
have
is.
my official membership card because I got a shirt from them, and they give you a card.
Hey, Jake. On the meetup page, it says to comment and ask about the Discord updated link. I tried the one that shows up in Google and it says it's expired. What do I need to do to join the Discord?
Okay, I will go to the meetup page and I will post
I
the
don't have it.
updated link.
Maybe are the birds controlling you?
I don't know. Maybe they stole it.
Actually, let's see. Email, Dropbox, SneakerNet. Nobody can figure it out.
Dapley.
Travis 801?
Trey 801
Trave 801.
at Gmail.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I could just tell you and right now, if you have the join the server up.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So do J lowercase, well, maybe I'll just show you rather than Mike.
All right. Well, everybody that's, whoever's left online, I am logging off. Thanks for joining in. If you've got any last questions, now's the time to ask them. I'm going to close this off in 20 seconds.